Looks like we got some cold weather on the horizon, so I wanted to jump on here real quick and share with you what I do to protect my plants when there's cold weather coming. Hey friends, I'm Katrina with Homegrown Florida. I am just a little bit on the north side of Central Florida, just north of Tampa in Zone 9B. And I occasionally do get frost in the winter. Typically, every year I'm gonna get between 1 and 3 frosts. There has been one year that I got 0 frost, but most of the time it's somewhere around 2 or 3 frosts a year. And I have to decide if I'm going to protect things like these tomatoes or if I'm just going to let them live out their life until the frost takes them. So first, let's talk about what plants need protection and at what temperatures, because I think this gets a little dicey. I have tropicals in my garden. I have avocados, I have bananas, I have turmeric, ginger. Like, I have a decent amount of tropicals in my garden, and I don't really protect them until we get down to 32 degrees. Now, if you don't want to chance it like me, because mine are fairly mature, you might want to stick to like the 35-degree number. For warm season crops, that's going to be things like tomatoes, peppers, squash, cucumbers, beans, corn. I feel like I'm missing one. But those warm weather crops, sweet potatoes, cowpeas, those are hot weather crops. That's what I call hot weather crops. Okra, eggplants. Those are all kind of hot and warm weather crops. Some people say they start protecting them down to 40 degrees. I wait much longer than that. I wait till about 35 to 32 degrees. Now, you are kind of chancing it if you go all the way down to 32 degrees like me, because there is a plus or minus factor when you're looking at the forecast. The forecast might say you're going to be 35 and then you wake up that morning and it's 31. You know, like they're not perfect. So you have to be willing to risk it all like me. But I would say if it's saying 40, you're probably still okay. And in fact, I feel like it kind of gives the plants a little bit more robust. But anything at that 35 mark or under, I would say you really need to strongly start considering if you want to pick all the fruit, if you want to cover them with something, if you want to move your pots inside. Those are all options to help protect them. But you don't really have to start doing that until you get down to 35. So let's talk about some of the ways that we protect them, especially the warm weather and the hot weather crops. So the first and easiest way is to get a frost blanket. There's one that I really like called Blanket. I'll put it down in the description if you want to check that out. But you can also use sheets, blankets. Another option to keep them warm, especially if you're going to drop below 32 degrees, is going to be putting incandescent Christmas lights. And now is a great time to pick some of those up. Don't get the LEDs. They don't put off enough warmth. You need the old school warm bulb incandescent Christmas lights. They still sell them. You can get them on Amazon. But you can kind of drape those over the plant, particularly around the outside, and up at the top where the cold air kind of comes in contact first. And whenever you're covering your plants, you don't just want to cover the top of them and leave the bottom open. The heat actually radiates from the ground. So what you need to do is you need to cover it and come all the way down to the ground and don't allow any gaps. It's kind of like your house, right? You don't want air gaps in your house and then it'll make your house kind of drafty and cold. You want the same situation going on here. You want to cover it all the way down to the base of your bed or your ground or whatever, and use clips or something weighted like sandbags or something to hold it down there so that there's not any gaps where little air can seep in, because once air starts seeping in, yeah, you've lost the battle at that point. A viewer told me about hand warmers, and this is something that us Floridians just don't understand, but I bought a pack of hand warmers. I'm going to try those this year to see if hand warmers will keep the plants warm as well. I don't hold out a lot of hope for those, but if I'm desperately in love with a plant, I might do that. So we just talked about tropicals and warm weather. Let's talk about cold weather crops. So I have a field of little brassicas here with some dill. So cold weather crops are going to be things like anything brassica, anything leafy green. When we're talking roots, we're talking probably all of them. I'm trying to think, not sweet potatoes, but carrots, onions, garlic, turnips, rutabagas, and potatoes. These are all cold weather, with some of them being really hardy and some of them being not so hardy, right? And then the other one is peas. And I'm going to throw peas and potatoes into a little bit separate of a bucket because of my experiences with them, and all the rest of the cold weather crops we're going to talk about temperature wise. Okay, so I have had my cold weather crops outside of the peas and potatoes. We're going to talk about those in just a second, but all the other cold weather crops, I have gotten them down to 26 degrees with no covering. The 26 degrees was just for a couple hours, and then it warmed up during the day, and then it dropped again to 26 degrees. So 2 days in a row at 26 degrees for a couple hours overnight, and then it warms up during the day. If that's what you're looking at, you can probably leave them uncovered. There is some damage to the leaves. They will get a little bit messed up. They're going to be a little unhappy, but they recover just fine. If you want to cover them, you absolutely can. I don't have that much frost cloth or that much time in my life to be covering cool weather crops. They usually do fine. And some cool weather crops actually taste even better when they've been hit with a frost. I'm talking celery, Brussels sprouts, kale and carrots. They all taste better when they get a bit of cold temperature. Now, if you are dealing with snow, like our friends in Pensacola last winter, I don't even know. All right, yeah, that you have to cover, right? If you're getting deep down into the 20s or teens, and you've got snow actually touching the plant, yeah, they're not gonna make it through that. The frost cloths and all the things that we do to protect our plants, it's not for any temperature. It's going to stop working after about the mid-20s, especially on these cold weather crops. You know, even cold weather, hot weather, there is a limit to how much they can handle even with a frost cloth. Now let's talk peas and potatoes, because I feel like those are a little bit different. They can handle cold weather. I've gotten them down into the 30 degree, 28 degree time without covering them, and they do okay. Unhappy, but they do okay. But if you let them get any further down, they are gonna die. The cool thing about the potatoes is I had that happen to me one year because I thought that they were super deep, into the 20s. So the tops all died, completely wilted, died like a tomato plant. But then they re-sprouted, and I grew them all the way to spring, and I grew the biggest potatoes. I'm not actually sure if the potatoes that it had produced had sprouted or the original seed potatoes had sprouted. But either way, I got a great harvest that year. So it's not the end of the world. If you lose your potatoes, just leave them in there and wait. Sometimes it takes 4 to 6 weeks for the sprouts to re-pop up. Don't stress it, they will come back. Now peas, on the other hand, they're not necessarily gonna come back. And usually what happens to my peas is the top half of them freeze and then the bottom half is still okay. So I'll leave them up looking just raggedy for a little while so that I can harvest whatever is available and then move on with my life and put in new pea plants down. Thankfully, they grow very, very fast. And whenever you're about to deal with cold temperatures, I think it's really, really important that you harvest as much as you can, even if it is not fully ripened. So if you have squash and they're still a little bit small, go ahead and harvest them. If you have winter squash and they're just a hint of color, I would go ahead and take those off, leave them on the counter. They should color up and fully ripen inside your house, no problem. Or you can wait for the weather to get warm again and leave them outside somewhere for the heat to hit them, and they'll ripen up that way. Tomatoes, if they're green, but they're full size, or maybe they've got a little blush on them, go ahead and pull those guys out and put them inside the house on a windowsill. Those will ripen up. If you don't do that and a frost does hit and the temperatures hit that one temperature that they need, they start to break down the fruit, and then they're not good for anything. They're not good for fresh eating. They taste really weird. They get really mushy, and they're not good for preserving. So make sure that you go out and harvest as much as you possibly can. You can harvest peppers when they're still green. They won't be fully ripe. They won't have that amazing red taste that they get, that ripened taste, but you're not losing the fruit, and I think that's an important thing. The next thing we need to talk about are all the containers. I grow lots of things in containers, whether it's my green stalks or just independent pots, and those don't keep warm as well as in-ground things, because the in-ground stuff is actually getting a lot of radiant heat from the ground, where these guys, they just have enough soil in here to give them a little bit of heat, but it's not going to hold on. So really anything that's in a pot or container needs to be protected. The easiest way to protect a pot or a container is to move it. And you don't have to move it far. I move into my shed here, but if you don't have a shed, maybe you have a lanai, a covering, move them over into that area. Anything that has overhead or blocking around, anything that's close to the house. So if all you have is putting them close to the house, make sure that they're full-blown touching, and then put a frost cloth over them or a blanket over them. The heat from the house should radiate, especially If you're like a block home like me, that heat holds on to the block for a really long time. I put banana trees in pots up against the house and everything else froze, but those bananas didn't freeze because they were touching the house, and the house is giving off just enough radiant heat to keep them from getting below that 32-degree temperature. So move them. You can move them to a garage. You can move them to a shed. You can move them to a covered patio. You could just have them touching the house. All of those are options. And don't be nervous about leaving them in the spots for a little while. Like if you have to leave them in the garage for 2 or 3 days, that's fine. Leave them in the shed 2 or 3 days, that's fine. Just make sure that those areas that you're putting them in is not heating up too quickly, because we have the situation where it will drop to really cold temperatures and the next day it's like 80 degrees. Wild swings. When you get to those wild swings, that kind of bothers them, and those covered areas like garages and sheds will heat up more quickly, and so it's a wild swing that's even more of a wild swing for them. So if it is looking like that kind of situation, you do want to get them out kind of quickly. But if they're just touching the house or under a covered patio or something, you can leave them there for a few days. They don't need sun every single day. They are fine with losing sun for about 3 or 4 days and being okay. It's just like if we got like a rainstorm that lasted like a week, they live through that. They're just not happy. And then the last one we have to talk about are fruit trees. So fruit trees, bushes, anything like that where they are perennials. Really could be any perennials. It could be your ornamental plants, any of your flowers that you love. You need to check each one of them to see what they can handle. So loquats right there can handle into the 20s, so I don't worry about them. Peach trees, plum trees, they can handle way below 0. Like there's nothing that's gonna hurt them. But something like my avocado tree or my banana trees, those are not necessarily in love with getting down super low, especially if they're young. So if you have a young tree, and young, I mean 2 years or younger in the ground, not 2 years or younger like from the pot, 2 years or younger in the ground. Those need protection. So the way that you protect a tree is you cover the entire top of the canopy, and then you bring that sheet straight down and touch the ground, and then put blocks, pavers, sandbags, something heavy on the edges of them so that it blocks any drafts coming in from underground, just like we talked about with the raised beds and the veggies. You want to try to cover the entire thing. Now, if your tree is too big, right, it's too big for that, at least cover the ground around the drip line of the tree, and then come up the trunk of the tree and try to cover at least the top part of the canopy, or I'm sorry, the bottom part of the canopy. Try to cover that, and definitely give some protection to the graft line and right above the graft line. Because if you got grafted trees, I grow a lot of grafted trees, if you can keep that part alive, usually it will sprout things at the top. The whole top of the tree could die, and as long as you get some sprouts from the trunk of the tree above the graft line, you still have a tree. That happened with my avocado. It was like really devastated, like really bad devastated. But above the graft line, there was still sprouts, and it has come back with a vengeance. It's so beautiful. But that was after, you know, it being in the ground for 3 years, and then we got hit with a pretty cold temperatures, and I didn't protect it. It was too big at that point, and I didn't want to, and I thought, oh, 3 years, it'll be fine. And it was fine. It looked awful. It died off a lot of branches, but it bounced right back. And that's why I use that 2-year mark to indicate whether or not you need to protect your trees. Because at 3 years, they're kind of at a point where they can handle things, not Pensacola 6 inches of snow kind of stuff, but they can handle like our typical winter situations going on down here. But if they're 2 years or younger, you really need to do the extra work. You're not gonna have to do that forever. It's just this winter that you have to do it. Maybe next winter as well, depending on when you put your tree in. Try to, you know, just protect it those first 2 years, and it should hold its own even if it gets really beat up. Last but not least, let's talk about seedlings, because these guys, I get a lot of questions on whether or not they can handle frosts. And you know, if they're a cool weather plant, I don't worry too much, especially if it's just gonna get, you know, into the low 30s. I will plant them just like this. I feel like they do better in the ground than in trays. But in trays, you could just pick this little tray up and bring it inside for the night. So both ways are kind of easier. If you have warm weather crops, these need to go inside. Do not try to keep little tiny seedlings that are warm weather or hot weather crops Don't keep young trees or young little seedlings like this guy right here. This is a Jaboticaba. I would never leave this out. This is a tropical plant, and it's in a pot still. I would take this inside. There's no point in losing that by trying to put it in the ground. But I'm more risky when it comes to the cool weather plants, like these guys right here. This is like kohlrabi, kale, and cabbage. I would totally just put these in the ground and see how they do. But you don't have to. Take this tray, bring them inside for the night, bring them back out. Now these guys are a little bit more finicky when it comes to the sun. So earlier we talked about taking your potted plants and putting them in a shed or a garage or something, and you can leave them in there for like 2 or 3 days. It's not going to hurt them. These guys, they're really young and they really want all the sun that they could get. So you're going to want to bring these out immediately upon getting above 40 degrees. Once it's above 40 degrees, bring them back out, let them sit outside, but keep bringing them back inside if you're getting into the low 30s. I hope that helped you guys. I hope you make it through this winter, and hopefully we don't get like the snow like Pensacola got this year. I'm kind of hoping for a nice mild winter where I can grow tomatoes through the whole season, but if that doesn't happen, that's okay. We know what we can grow, we know what can make it through, and now you have a plan of attack of how to protect your plants. Happy gardening, guys.